And if I were to summarize to you to begin with how I see the situation, how Palestinians see the situation today, 20 years after Madrid, Washington, and 18 years after the Oslo breakthrough, I would say the following. For us Palestinians, the Nakba catastrophe is not a frozen moment that has happened sometime in 1948. Alas, unfortunately, it is still an ongoing process until today. Number two, and I'm a peace enthusiast. I'm the one, ladies and gentlemen, who introduced the Palestinian and the Israeli who became the Oslo negotiators. Unfortunately for us, I believe that Israeli governmental policy, left, right, and center, has been consistent and constant. They still want to acquire as much of Palestinian geography as possible with as little of Palestinian demography as possible. Number three, 20 years after Madrid, 18 years after Oslo, one has to admit with great pain that the years of theoretical peacemaking were not years of Israeli withdrawals, but of the expansion of occupation through the elastic growth of the illegal settlements that have eaten up and fragmented, cantonized, and Palestinian territories, mainly the West Bank. Number four, especially today that there are ceasefires between the West Bank and Israel, and I'm happy about it, from Gaza and Israel, I believe any serious observer, objective observer today would say that it's not terrorism which is the obstacle to peace, but territory, the territorial appetite which is the obstacle to peacemaking. Number four, five, I believe that years after the Arab Peace Initiative was adopted by the Arab League in 2002, and by the way, the Abdallah plan was not very different from the Fahd plan of 1982 already. We can say that for many, many years there was an Arab peace plan that stipulated if Israel withdrew out of its 67 expansion, we, the Arabs, are ready to recognize its pre-67 existence. The fact that we are still in a diplomatic deadlock and impasse is not the result of an Arab rejection of Israeli existence, but an Israeli rejection of Arab acceptance, again for the territorial reason and the territorial appetite. And one has to bear in mind that the impasse today is not due to an Arab rejection of Israeli existence, but to Israeli rejection of Arab acceptance today. Number six, we the Palestinians, we the Arabs applauded the birth of the quartet, which is the diplomatic construction that was supposed to be the vehicle for peacemaking, made out of the USA, the EU, Russia, and the UN to represent everybody else. Today we have to admit that the quartet turned out to be mainly a one-tet operation. And unfortunately, I believe that the American administration, and I could say administrations, suffer in the Middle East of what I call self-inflicted impotence. And I believe, ladies and gentlemen, that each time we are promised American pressure, it turns out to be as though the only remaining superpower carries the weight of Luxembourg or Liechtenstein, Belize or Botswana. And I am sad that President Obama has lost probably 4 battles in his confrontation of wills with Prime Minister Netanyahu. I will start by quoting Yuri Avneri, because I believe it would make my assessments seem less immoderate if you heard what he thought was the situation. And Yuri Avneri, for those who don't know, is a distinguished Israeli who was Knesset member for almost 20 years and was an editor-in-chief of a very major publication from the 60s onwards, and is a very gifted, talented writer, a decent Israeli, self-respecting, and I have great admiration for him. He circulates a weekly article by the internet, and they have a life of their own, always beautifully crafted, and the one he penned after the passage of Netanyahu in Washington and his speech to Congress on Capitol Hill said the following. There they were, the members of the highest legislative bodies of the world's only superpower, flying up and down like so many yo-yos, applauding wildly every few minutes or seconds the most outrageous lies and distortions of Benjamin Netanyahu. It was worse than the Syrian parliament during a speech by Bashar al-Assad, where anyone not applauding could find himself in prison, or Stalin's Supreme Soviet, when showing less than sufficient respect, could have meant death. What the American senators and congressmen feared was a fate worse than death. Anyone remaining seated or not applauding wildly enough could have been caught on camera. And that amounts to political suicide. It was enough for one single congressman to rise and applaud, and all the others had to follow suit. Who would have dared not to? The sight of these hundreds of parliamentarians jumping and clapping their hands again and again, again and again and again, with the leader graciously acknowledging with a movement of his hand, was reminiscent of other regimes. Only this time, it was not the local dictator who compelled this adulation, but a foreign ruler. I will not concede for you. I, for one, and I don't know how representative I am on that one, I happen to like America. I have read much of the academic products in political science, international relations. I've seen almost every Hollywood film from the beginning of cinema up to today. I like America. And when Obama was running for the presidency, my wife and I were posted in Washington, and when I was asked on the lecturing circle, what do you think of candidate Obama, who was not yet a serious contender? As you know, ambassadors have to exercise self-restraint. I would say my wife believes that candidate, and she believed that candidate Obama is reawakening American idealism, and that he is a candidate who can reconcile America with itself and reconcile America with the world. And I still believe that, even though he hasn't yet delivered on the Palestinian issue at all, except some beautifully crafted speeches. And for us Palestinians, it is an intriguing phenomenon, because I believe that the birth of a Palestinian state is an American national interest. And that was already said by Condi Rice, President Bush in the previous administration, repeated by President Obama. I believe that today the American positions are closer to the Palestinian aspiration rather than to the Israeli preference. I believe that we, the Arabs, have understood throughout the last decades that America is committed to Israel's existence, but I don't think America is committed to Israel's expansion. In Israel proper, there is a debate on the wisdom, the sagacity of keeping the hilltops of the West Bank. But I wonder, what is America's interest in Israel keeping the hilltops of the West Bank? I believe that an increasing number of people in the establishment, including in the Pentagon, and General Petraeus is an example of that, believe that the perception of collusion between America and Israel is what has put America on a collision course with much of the Arabo-Islamic world. I always said, ladies and gentlemen, Palestine is a test between courage and cowardice. And I always used to say, let's hope that our rendezvous with history, with courage, is not in the too distant future. And I believe, ladies and gentlemen, that we Palestinians today became unreasonably reasonable. It's so easy to satisfy our expectations because we have become so unreasonably reasonable. And believe you me, not only Palestine is a test for American credibility, believability, but it is a test for American lovability. I can dream and think of how lovable Americans would be traveling around the world if America was to be perceived as the locomotive of that drive, of that effort towards ending the occupation and the birth of a Palestinian state.